Grace and peace to you from Jesus Christ, who is the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth. We'll give our attention again to the account of Jesus at Martha's house in Luke chapter 10. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." This is the gospel of our Lord. Brothers and sisters, if we had a time machine and could go back 2,000 years and pick up Martha and bring her here with a change of clothes and some English lessons, she'd fit right in. Martha is the typical American. Always something to do, never enough time in the day to do it. Americans, we're not like the French with their 35-hour work weeks and 5 weeks paid vacation and 4-course meals. We're busy, and we want everyone to know it. What time we get up in the morning, how many hours a week we work. Those are like status symbols in our society. I think I know why. Because if I'm busy, that means I must be important. So if Martha is the typical American, does that make Mary French? Like, industrious Martha is breaking her back to give her guest the first-class treatment. I see her like washing Jesus' feet and sitting him at the head of the table while she multitasks the bread baking and the vegetable cutting and the table setting. Everything is going to be just perfect for Jesus. Except that her sister isn't helping. Maybe at first it's just a cold stare as she chops carrots and maybe rattles the dishes a little bit more than necessary to let everybody know that at least she's doing something. But then finally, the anger boils over. "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." If you've ever had a family or a roommate or a group project at school, you've been there. There's 2 things about this little exchange, though, that stand out. One is Martha's outbreak. She doesn't walk over to Jesus and tap him on the shoulder and say, "Hey, Jesus, it's almost time to eat. There's still a lot to do. Could you take a break in the lesson so that Mary can help me?" No, she's angry at Jesus. The word that Luke uses here, it's like she gets right up in Jesus' face. "Lord, don't you care? Is that the way that you talk to your dinner guest?" And then the second thing that stands out here is Jesus' reaction to Martha's outbreak. He doesn't look over at the sundial and say, the time got away from me. Okay, Mary, time to get up and do your fair share. No, he's like, "Martha, you could learn something from your sister. Martha, here you are. Your attention is focused on 1,000 different things, on everything except the one thing needed. Mary's chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." The one thing needed. It's not to take it easy every now and then. Most people in the history of the world have managed life without vacations. The one thing needed is Jesus. The one thing needed is Jesus. But that doesn't mean that Martha shouldn't have invited Jesus into her home and given Jesus the first-class treatment. Martha was doing something good. In fact, all those preparations that Martha was doing afforded Mary the opportunity to sit down at Jesus' feet. So, that there would be more servants like Martha. If we could go back in that time machine and bring Martha to Living Hope, just imagine what the sign-up sheets for refreshments and church cleaning would look like. It would just be Martha, 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 all the way down. In order to function, a congregation needs servants like Martha. A well-functioning congregation is full of people who serve like Martha. But if you have any hint of a Martha streak in you, then you know what can happen, the snare that lies in wait. I think you know what it is. I don't even need to tell you. I'll just give you a hint. It starts with an R, and it ends with resentment. You serve Jesus, and you pour yourself out. There's always more to do than energy to do it. You pour yourself out, and does it ever seem like you're one of the only ones that's pouring yourself out? And then you look at all the other people that aren't there doing whatever it is that you're doing, and the reason they're not there is probably not because they're at home studying their Bibles. So here you are serving Jesus, and there they are serving themselves. Does it ever make you feel like Martha? Up in Jesus' face, Lord, don't you care? And maybe you wish that the pastor would speak out against those apathetic members a little bit more than he does, because that would justify the way that you feel and let them know that they're not going to get away with it without a clean conscience. But what if Jesus responded to you the same way that he responded to Martha? Martha, Martha. He says it gently, but it had to sting. Martha, Martha, you could actually learn something from your sister Mary. Mary isn't the problem here. Even if Mary had been off getting her nails done instead, that still would not have justified Martha's resentment. It doesn't tell us how Martha responded to Jesus' gentle rebuke, but I can imagine her saying, or at least thinking, what in the world, Jesus? Here I am pouring myself out for you, and you take her side? And if she had responded that way, then can't you imagine Jesus responding back to her? Martha, Martha, if you really are pouring yourself out for me, then why are you so angry at me for having to do it? But yet Luke doesn't tell us how Martha responded. And when the Bible cuts off conversations abruptly like that, God's giving us the opportunity to think about how we would have responded. Like when I feel like Martha, what does that tell me about my attitude toward serving Jesus? Can I call it an act of love for Jesus when I'm jealous of the people who got out of doing what I didn't want to do either, but here I'm stuck doing it? But we've talked enough about Mary and Martha, what they were doing. Let's talk about what Jesus was doing. Do you think that Jesus was over at Martha's house because it was a free meal? Jesus is always serving. If we think about the events that would unfold over the next weeks, months, we can get a pretty good idea of just how Jesus was serving in that moment. Mary and Martha, they had a brother named Lazarus. And they didn't know it at the time, but Lazarus was going to die soon. And Jesus was not going to be there to stop it. And something else that they probably didn't realize either was that Jesus was going to die soon. And there wasn't anything that they'd be able to do to stop it. Jesus went over to dinner to prepare Mary and Martha for death. Their brother's death, Jesus' own death, that capricious monster that has no regard at all for a person's age or health or how many other people depend on them. Sometimes it takes its victims slowly, sometimes without a moment's notice, but it's always awful. It's the wages of sin, and it comes for us all. We just don't know when. Jesus went over to dinner to prepare them for death, but the way that Jesus prepares people for death, it's not like the way hospice does it, by handing you a pamphlet that explains the process and tries to dignify it in some way, and then uses medications and massages and music to try to distract the mind and dull the pain. Jesus prepares people for death by telling them that he's defeated it. So, Martha's in the kitchen getting dinner ready. Mary's sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to him. And another thing that Luke doesn't tell us is what the lesson was on that day. But I'd like to think that maybe Jesus was telling them something that he would repeat for them later on, 4 days after their brother Lazarus died. Mary's sitting at his feet, and Jesus is saying, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. Or maybe, in addition to that, Jesus was reviewing with them something that he'd told them before. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep. I lay down my life for the sheep, only to take it back up again. And they may not have realized what those words would mean for them down the road. But Jesus knew. And he was not going to let that be taken from them. The one thing needed, it's not more help in the kitchen or preaching to myself, a second pastor. The one thing needed is Jesus. The one thing in all the world that even if you have nothing else, it's still all you need. Really. That's what Jesus says. Mary has chosen what is better, the one thing needed. It will not be taken away from her. One thing in all the world. Do you believe that? Can I give you an example? My wife told me about a friend of our friend whose 7-year-old son was struck by a vehicle toward the end of June. 7-year-old boy. It reminds me a lot of Zoe, Lauren's friend that we've been praying for over the last several months with the brain swelling and all that. But this one ended differently. After 7 days of receiving the best that medicine could offer, that 7-year-old boy died. I think about all that his Christian parents gave him. The meals, the education, the discipline, the bedtime stories, all the love that they poured out. But when that vehicle struck him and his brain swelled. There was just one thing they gave him that he finally needed. They gave him Jesus. They baptized him. They taught him to sit at Jesus' feet and to receive through his words the blessings of Jesus' life and death and resurrection. And then I think about that broken family standing at the 7-year-old boy's graveside, missing one, but missing everything. And what they needed, same thing. And I bet it's what they heard. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep. I lay down my life for my sheep, only to take it back up again. Only one thing is needed, and it will not be taken away. And those words, those aren't just words. 4 days after their brother Lazarus died, Jesus would come back to Mary and Martha's house and show them that he is the resurrection and the life. And then after that, Jesus would go to Jerusalem, and the good shepherd would lay down his life for the sheep, only to take it back up again. The wages of sin is death. Jesus didn't have any sins to die for. But Mary and Martha and Lazarus did, and you and me and that 7-year-old boy. And the good shepherd laid down his life for the sheep. And he took it back again. And that makes those words true. There's still a whole lot to do. Maybe that's we're especially acutely aware of that today with 2 services and a meal and a new pastor to welcome and a new congregation to learn and to serve. There's so much to do. So what are we doing right now? We're not doing any of it. We're setting down our work and we're listening. You cannot give what you haven't first received. And if we don't keep on receiving and filling our hearts up with it, it's not going to take long at all before we have nothing left to give, and our hearts have nothing in them but resentment. So we sit down at Jesus' feet. That's our food. And we drink it in, how Jesus poured out himself for you. And we drink it in, how Jesus keeps on pouring out himself for you. And then all that work and the busyness, it just kind of happens. Not that it doesn't take work, but still it just kind of happens. When you fill your heart up with Jesus, do you know what happens? He overflows. Amen.